The starship Aurora's Edge moved through space like a silver needle threading through black cloth. Inside the luxury vessel, Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck, watching distant stars blur past. He was a simple man from Colorado who had spent most of his life fixing helicopters for the military. Now he was heading to represent Earth in something called the Galactic Survival Championship. "Still can't believe they picked us," said Dr. Lisa Carter, joining him at the window. She was a marine biologist from California who studied fish for a living. Her curly brown hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the same confused expression she'd had since leaving Earth. Ben Rodriguez walked over to them, carrying 3 cups of coffee. He was a park ranger from New Mexico who taught people how to survive in the wilderness. His weathered hands and sun-darkened skin told the story of a man who spent more time outdoors than inside. The alien folks said they wanted the toughest species in the galaxy to compete. Guess they figured humans might be worth a shot. Amy Walsh looked up from her medical supplies where she was doing inventory. She was an emergency room nurse from Chicago who had seen every kind of injury and accident imaginable. Her blonde hair was cut short for practicality, and her blue eyes held the calm confidence of someone who had saved lives under pressure. "I still don't understand why they need a medic for a survival contest." Jake took a sip of his coffee and shrugged. "Maybe they expect people to get hurt. These alien champions they told us about sound pretty serious." The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Human delegation, please report to Conference Room 7. The Zephyrian coordinators wish to brief you on your competitors." The 4 humans made their way through the ship's corridors. Everything was too smooth, too clean, too perfect. Jake missed the rough edges and practical design of human machines. When they reached the conference room, they found 3 aliens waiting for them. Dr. Velthari was the tournament coordinator. She looked like a tall, thin person covered in blue scales, with large golden eyes that never seemed to blink. Her voice came out in perfectly measured tones, as if she was always giving a lecture. "Welcome, humans. We are pleased you accepted our invitation to participate in the Galactic Survival Championship." "Thanks for having us," Jake said, settling into a chair that adjusted itself automatically to his body. "Though I'm still not sure why you picked Earth. We only joined your galactic community last year." Dr. Velthari's scales shimmered slightly, which the humans had learned meant she was pleased. "Precisely why you intrigue us. Most species require centuries to develop proper survival protocols. Your species achieved space travel while still living in what we consider primitive conditions." Lisa leaned forward. "What do you mean by primitive conditions? Your planet contains environments that would be instantly fatal to most civilized species. Yet humans inhabit these areas voluntarily." Dr. Velthari gestured to a holographic display that showed images of Earth. Deserts with lethal temperature variations, frozen wastelands, toxic jungles, deep ocean trenches, radioactive zones. Most remarkable. Amy and Ben exchanged glances. These didn't sound particularly dangerous to them. "Now," Dr. Velthari continued, "let me introduce your competitors." The hologram changed to show a massive reptilian creature covered in thick, rocky scales. Its eyes glowed like molten lava, and steam rose from its nostrils. "This is Krexithor of the Reptilian Dominion. His species evolved on volcanic worlds where surface temperatures exceed 200 degrees Celsius. He's never lost a survival challenge." Ben whistled softly. "He looks tough." The display shifted to show a creature that looked like it was made of living ice and crystal. Its skin was translucent blue and frost formed in the air around it. Zalandra from the ice worlds of Vortex Prime. Her people survive in environments where most matter becomes solid. She can function in temperatures that would instantly freeze other beings. Amy studied the image. How does she not melt in normal temperatures? "She wears a specialized cooling suit at all times," Dr. Velthari explained. "Without it, she would die within minutes." The final image showed something that barely looked solid, more like a cloud of gas held together by will and electricity. Its form constantly shifted and sparked with internal lightning. Quinval of the gas giant colonies. His species exists in atmospheric pressures that would crush most creatures instantly. He manipulates matter through electromagnetic fields. Jake looked at his teammates. They were going up against beings who had evolved in conditions that would kill humans quickly, while humans had apparently impressed the aliens by living on a planet they considered a death trap. The tournament consists of 5 challenges, Dr. Velthari continued. Each will test your ability to survive in environments that have historically proven fatal to various species. You will have access to basic equipment, but advanced technology is forbidden. We wish to test natural survival abilities. What kind of environments? Lisa asked. That would spoil the challenge, Dr. Velthari said, her scales shifting to a darker blue. However, I can tell you that each location has been carefully selected based on conditions that nearly led to extinction events for various galactic civilizations. After the briefing, the 4 humans sat in the ship's recreation room, trying to process what they'd learned. So let me get this straight, Amy said, stirring her coffee. They think our planet is so dangerous that living on it makes us qualified to compete against beings who are basically living weapons? Seems that way, Jake replied, though I grew up in Colorado. Mountains, snow, heat, cold. It's all just weather. Ben laughed. I spend my summers in Death Valley teaching tourists how not to die. These aliens act like Earth is some kind of nightmare world. Lisa pulled up information about their competitors on her tablet. Look at this. Krexthor's homeworld has an average temperature of 180 degrees Celsius. Zalandra's planet never gets above minus 150 degrees. Quinval lives where the atmospheric pressure is 60 times stronger than Earth's. And they think we're the dangerous ones, Amy said with a smile. Jake looked out the viewport at the stars rushing past. In 2 days, they would reach the tournament location. He thought about his childhood camping trips with his father in the Rocky Mountains. They'd slept under the stars in freezing temperatures, hiked through desert heat, and survived thunderstorms that would probably terrify these alien champions. Maybe Earth was more dangerous than he'd ever realized. Maybe humans were tougher than they gave themselves credit for, or maybe the rest of the galaxy was just softer than anyone expected. Well, he said, raising his coffee cup, here's to representing humanity. Let's try not to embarrass our entire species. The others raised their cups and laughed, unaware that 3 alien champions in different parts of the ship were studying videos of Earth and trying to understand how any creature could survive in such a hostile environment. The tournament was about to begin, and nobody was prepared for what they would discover about what humans called normal life. The transport ships descended through the orange atmosphere of Scorpius 7, a planet that had once been home to a thriving civilization. Now it was nothing but endless desert and rock formations, baked by a merciless sun during the day and frozen, solid at night. The temperature swings had killed the original inhabitants 3,000 years ago, making it perfect for the first challenge. Jake Morrison stepped off the human transport and immediately felt the heat hit him like opening an oven door. The thermometer on his wrist showed 152 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot, but not unbearable. He'd worked on helicopter engines in Iraq during summer deployments where it felt just as bad. Well, this is pleasant, Ben Rodriguez said, pulling his hat down to shade his eyes. As a park ranger in New Mexico, he'd guided tourists through Death Valley in similar conditions. Reminds me of home. Dr. Lisa Carter and Amy Walsh joined them, both looking around with interest rather than fear. Lisa had done research in the Mojave Desert, while Amy had worked emergency shifts during Chicago heat waves that killed dozens of people each summer. Around them, the alien champions were taking very different approaches to the environment. Krexthor emerged from his transport inside a massive environmental suit that hummed with cooling systems. Despite being from a volcanic world, the reptilian needed precise temperature control to function properly. His species had evolved for consistent high heat, not the wild swings that Scorpius 7 offered. Zalandra appeared encased in a refrigeration unit that looked like a walking freezer. Frost formed constantly around her cooling systems as they fought against the desert heat. Her ice world physiology couldn't handle anything above freezing without technological assistance. Quinval's electromagnetic form flickered inside a protective field generator. The energy creature needed stable atmospheric conditions to maintain cohesion. The planet's temperature changes were disrupting his ability to hold his shape together. Dr. Velthari materialized as a hologram near the starting area. Her image wavered in the heat distortion. Champions, welcome to your first trial. You must survive on Scorpius 7 for 72 hours. Daytime temperatures reach 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Nighttime temperatures drop to minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Water is scarce, food must be found or created, and shelter must be constructed using only materials found on the planet. Jake looked around at the landscape. Rocky outcroppings, scrub, brush, some scattered metallic debris from the dead civilization. Not much different from camping in Nevada, except for the alien ruins. You may begin when ready, Dr. Velthari announced. The alien champions immediately deployed sophisticated equipment. Krexthor activated terrain scanners and resource analyzers. Zalandra sent out robotic probes to map the area while remaining inside her cooling unit. Quinval used electromagnetic pulses to locate underground water sources. The humans took a different approach. Ben walked over to a cluster of rocks and knelt down, examining the ground. Jake, remember what your dad taught you about reading terrain? Jake nodded, studying the slight discoloration in the sand between two large boulders. Water flow. Something runs through here during storms. He pointed to scratch marks on the rocks. And that's from flash flooding. There's got to be water collection points somewhere downstream. Lisa was examining the local plant life, tough, waxy leaves and deep root systems. These are just like desert succulents back home. The thick leaves store water, and if we dig, down near the big ones, we should hit groundwater. Amy had found a shady spot between some ruins and was setting up their basic camp. She'd done emergency medicine during natural disasters and knew the importance of conserving energy during extreme conditions. We need shelter that works for both hot and cold, something that reflects heat during the day but holds warmth at night. The aliens watched in growing confusion as the humans spread out and began working with their bare hands and simple tools. Jake and Ben built their shelter using techniques they'd learned as children. They stacked rocks to create wind barriers, stretched their emergency blankets between metal debris to create shade, and dug a shallow depression that would trap warm air during the cold night. My granddad used to take me camping in Colorado winters, Jake said, arranging rocks to create a fire pit. He said the secret to staying comfortable wasn't fighting the weather, but working with it. Lisa found water exactly where she predicted, digging down 3 feet near a large plant until she hit a small underground spring. She filled their containers and set up a simple solar still using clear plastic and a collection cup. Amy rationed their food supplies and created a schedule for taking shelter during the hottest part of the day. She'd learned from treating heat, exhaustion cases, that the key was staying ahead of the problem, not reacting to it after it started. As the sun began to set, the temperature started dropping rapidly. The alien champions retreated into their heated shelters, sealing themselves away from the coming freeze. The humans adjusted their clothing layers, adding jackets and hats they'd carried in their packs. Ben started a fire using friction methods, creating flames with 2 sticks and some dry plant material he'd gathered during the day. This actually feels good, Amy said, warming her hands over the fire. Reminds me of camping with my family in Wisconsin. We used to go ice fishing when it was colder than this. From their heated shelters, the alien champions monitored human communications and grew increasingly bewildered. Did the female just say they voluntarily exposed themselves to these conditions for recreation? Krexthor asked his technical team. The translation seems accurate, his aide replied. They appear to have something called winter sports where they deliberately seek out freezing temperatures. Zalandra was reviewing thermal scans of the human camp. Their body temperatures remained stable without technological assistance. How is this possible? Her science officer checked the readings again. Their metabolic systems appear to naturally regulate temperature through multiple methods. Shivering increases heat production, sweating provides cooling, and they can consciously control blood flow to extremities. Quinval was the most disturbed. My sensors indicate they are actually comfortable. The electromagnetic patterns from their brains show contentment, not survival stress. By the second day, the differences became even more pronounced. The aliens remained hidden in their shelters during temperature extremes, only emerging during the brief periods of moderate weather. The humans adapted their activity schedule to work with the planet's rhythm. They were active during the cooler morning and evening hours, rested in shade during the worst heat, and stayed warm around their fire during the cold nights. Jake spent the afternoon repairing some equipment damage using techniques he'd learned, fixing helicopters in harsh conditions. Ben taught Lisa how to identify which parts of the dead plants were edible, knowledge he'd gained from survival training. Amy treated everyone's minor cuts and heat exposure using basic first aid that any experienced outdoors person would know. "You know what this reminds me of?" Ben said on the final evening, watching the sunset paint the desert rocks red and gold. "That camping trip we took in Big Bend National Park. Same kind of temperature swings, same desert plants, same beautiful sunsets," Lisa laughed. "Except Big Bend had rattlesnakes. This place is actually safer." The alien observers recorded every word, trying to understand how beings could describe a planet that had killed entire civilizations as safer than their recreational areas. On the morning of the third day, when the trial officially ended, the humans packed up their simple camp and walked back to the extraction point. They looked tired but healthy, like people returning from a successful camping trip. The alien champions emerged from their shelters surrounded by technological support systems. Despite their advanced equipment, they looked more stressed and exhausted than the humans. Dr. Velthari's hologram appeared for the debrief. Remarkable. All teams survived, though some required more technological assistance than others. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and grinned. "Not bad for a first challenge, though I have to say my dad would have loved this place. He always said the best camping was where it tested you a little." The alien champions stared at him in silence. They were beginning to realize they weren't competing against fellow champions who happened to be human. They were competing against a species that considered a planet capable of wiping out civilizations to be good camping weather. The tournament was just getting started, and already the aliens were learning that humans had a very different definition of what constituted dangerous conditions. The second trial took place on Verdania Prime, a planet that looked like paradise from orbit. Lush green forests stretched across every continent, with crystal-clear rivers and abundant wildlife. It had once been a vacation destination for the wealthy Cathari Empire until the colonists began dying in mysterious ways. Investigation revealed that nearly everything on the planet was toxic to most forms of life. The beautiful plants contained deadly alkaloids, the clear water carried paralyzing neurotoxins, and even the air held spores that could shut down alien nervous systems. Jake Morrison stepped out of the transport and breathed deeply. The air smelled like pine trees and wildflowers, reminding him of hiking trips in the Colorado Rockies. "Now this is more like it," he said, looking around at the dense forest canopy. Amy Walsh examined the bright purple and orange flowers growing near the landing site. As an emergency room nurse, she'd treated dozens of poisoning cases and had learned to recognize dangerous plants. "These look like they're related to foxglove. Pretty, but probably not something you'd want to eat." Dr. Lisa Carter was already studying the local ecosystem. The marine biologist's training had taught her to identify toxic organisms in ocean environments, skills that translated well to any biological system. The coloration patterns are classic warning signals. Bright colors usually mean stay away in nature. Ben Rodriguez knelt down to examine animal tracks in the soft soil. His years as a park ranger had taught him to read the signs that animals left behind. Whatever lives here is healthy and active. If the local wildlife can handle it, we can probably figure it out too. The alien champions took very different precautions. Krex Thor emerged wearing a full environmental suit with independent air supply. His people had evolved on worlds with simple ecosystems and had no natural resistance to complex toxins. Every breath had to be filtered, every surface scanned before contact. Zalandra remained sealed inside a mobile habitat unit. Her ice world physiology made her extremely vulnerable to biological compounds. Even trace amounts of organic toxins could disrupt her crystalline biology in fatal ways. Quinval flickered nervously inside multiple force fields. As an energy being, he was susceptible to electromagnetic disruption from certain biological compounds. The planet's diverse chemistry made it impossible for him to predict what might affect his coherence. Dr. Velthari's hologram materialized, looking more concerned than usual. Champions, welcome to Verdania Prime. This world contains over 200 documented toxic compounds that are lethal to most galactic species. The Cathari lost 3,000 colonists before abandoning this world. You must survive here for 96 hours, finding food, water, and shelter while avoiding the numerous biological hazards. Jake looked around at what appeared to be a perfectly normal forest. He'd hiked through similar terrain thousands of times without special equipment. Any particular toxins we should know about? Dr. Velthari's scales shifted to a worried dark blue. The list is extensive. Neurological disruptors, cellular destroyers, respiratory inhibitors, circulatory toxins, genetic modifiers, and numerous unknowns. We recommend extreme caution. The alien teams immediately began deploying sophisticated scanning equipment. Chemical analyzers, biological sensors, and robotic sample collectors spread out in careful patterns. The humans took a more direct approach. Ben walked over to a stream and knelt down to examine the water. It was clear and fast-moving, flowing over clean rocks. He cupped his hands and took a small sip, testing it like he would any wilderness water source. Tastes clean, no chemical aftertaste or odd colors. The alien observers went into panic mode. The human just consumed unfiltered liquid from the toxic zone. Krexthor's medical officer shouted into his communicator. Prepare emergency intervention protocols, Zalandra's science team ordered. Ben stood up and wiped his mouth. Water's good. Moving fast, clean source, no algae buildup. Should be safe. To drink if we boil it first, just like any camping trip. Amy was examining the local plant life with the systematic approach she'd learned treating poison cases. This red-leafed stuff looks like poison oak. These white berries are probably toxic. They look too much like baneberry. But these darker uns. She picked a handful of small purple fruits. These look like wild blueberries. She ate one carefully, waiting to see if there were any immediate effects. The watching aliens held their breath. Tastes like blueberries too, Amy said. Eating. A few more. Little more tart, but definitely edible. Lisa was having similar success with her analysis. The ecosystem makes sense if you know what to look for. The bright warning colors are real. Those plants are dangerous. But the subtle greens and browns are probably safe. It's the same pattern you see in earth forests. Jake had started building a shelter using fallen branches and leaves. He'd learned woodland construction from his father during hunting trips in various states. The wood here is just like hardwood back home. Good for building, burns clean, no weird smells or residues. By the end of the first day, the differences in approach had become stark. The alien champions remained sealed in their protective environments, consuming prepackaged rations and processed water. Their robots had identified 17 different toxin sources within 100 meters of their camp. The humans had established a comfortable woodland camp. They'd found safe water sources, identified edible plants, and were cooking fresh food over an open fire. You know what's funny? Amy said, stirring a stew made from local vegetables and their remaining emergency rations. My grandmother used to take me mushroom hunting in Michigan forests. Half the plants there could kill you if you ate the wrong ones, but she taught me how to tell the difference. Ben nodded, adding more wood to the fire. Same with desert plants. In the Southwest, everything looks dangerous, but once you know what to avoid, there's plenty that's safe to eat. The alien medical teams were frantically monitoring human vital signs, expecting imminent poisoning symptoms. Instead, they found the humans were healthier than when they'd started the trial. Their digestive systems are processing the local compounds without difficulty, Krexthor's doctor reported in amazement. They appear to have natural resistance to multiple toxin families. Zalandra's science officer was equally baffled. Their metabolism is actually breaking down harmful compounds and converting them to useful nutrients. How is this possible? The answer came on the second day when Lisa explained her botanical analysis to her teammates. Humans evolved eating a huge variety of plants and dealing with natural toxins every day. Our ancestors had to figure out what was safe and what wasn't just to survive. Coffee, chocolate, alcohol, spicy peppers. We eat stuff for fun that would kill most other species. Amy laughed while treating a minor scrape with local plant sap that worked like antiseptic. I had a patient last month who nearly died from eating wild mushrooms. But he was fine after treatment because humans have developed all kinds of ways to deal with plant poisoning. Our bodies expect to encounter toxins regularly. Jake was cooking fish he'd caught in the stream using techniques he'd learned during fishing trips with his uncle. My grandfather used to say that humans were like goats. We could eat almost anything if we were careful about it. The alien observers recorded every word with growing horror. Did they just compare themselves to a species known for consuming toxic waste? Quinval's cultural expert asked. They appear to consider regular toxin exposure normal, came the reply. On the third day, the humans began actively helping each other expand their knowledge of local resources. Ben showed the others how to identify animal trails that led to safe water sources. Lisa taught them which tree bark could be used for medicinal purposes. Amy demonstrated how to test plants for toxicity using small doses and careful observation. Jake discovered that some of the local wood produced excellent charcoal for water filtration, a technique he'd learned during military survival training. This place actually has better resources than most wilderness areas back home, Ben observed. No large predators, plenty of clean water, abundant plant life. It's like nature designed it for camping. The alien champions spent their time huddled in their shelters, surviving on declining supplies and growing more nervous each day. Their equipment kept identifying new dangers, making them afraid to leave their protective environments. When the trial ended, the contrast was obvious. The humans emerged from the forest looking refreshed and energized, like people returning from a successful camping trip. They carried samples of useful plants and had actually improved their knowledge of wilderness survival. The aliens emerged from their shelters looking haggard and stressed, despite their advanced life support systems. Dr. Velthari conducted the debrief with obvious confusion. The humans not only survived exposure to a toxic environment, but they thrived in it. They consumed local resources that our analysis indicates should have been fatal. Amy cleaned dirt from under her fingernails and smiled. It wasn't that bad. Reminded me of foraging trips with my family in Wisconsin. You just have to pay attention to what you're eating. Lisa nodded. The biodiversity here is amazing. Most of the plants have earth analogs. Once you understand the patterns, it's pretty straightforward. Ben stretched and looked back at the forest fondly. The fourth trial took place on Abyssos, an ocean world where the only land masses were small islands scattered across vast seas. The planet had once been home to the Aquarian Federation, a civilization of water-dwelling beings who had built magnificent underwater cities. Their empire had collapsed when massive pressure changes in their deep ocean colonies caused catastrophic implosions, killing millions. Now the planet served as a monument to the dangers of deep water environments. Jake Morrison stood on the rocky shore of their assigned island, watching waves crash against black volcanic stones. The water was deep blue-green, darker than any ocean he'd seen on Earth. According to their briefing, they would need to spend 4 days surviving in and around the ocean, including mandatory time in the deep underwater areas where the Aquarian cities had once stood. Well, this brings back memories, Amy Walsh said, adjusting her basic diving mask. As an emergency room nurse in Chicago, she'd also volunteered with the Coast Guard during summers, learning water rescue and basic diving techniques. Reminds me of the Great Lakes, except warmer. Dr. Lisa Carter was already studying the marine environment with obvious excitement. As a marine biologist, this was the kind of environment she'd spent her career exploring. The water clarity is incredible. I can see at least 60 feet down and look at the diversity of fish species. Ben Rodriguez tested the water temperature with his hand. Despite being a desert park ranger, he'd grown up near the Gulf Coast and was comfortable in ocean environments. Currents not too strong, water's warm enough for extended swimming. Could be worse. The alien champions approached the water challenge with considerably more concern. Krexthor emerged wearing a massive pressure suit that looked like a personal submarine. His volcanic world heritage had given him no experience with water environments, and the pressure changes could crush his rock-hard scales if not properly managed. Salandra had to remain on the surface inside a floating habitat unit. Her ice world physiology meant that entering the liquid water would literally dissolve her crystalline body structure. She could only observe from above. Quinval flickered nervously around his electromagnetic containment field. The conductive properties of seawater interfered with his energy matrix, making it dangerous for him to approach the ocean at all. Dr. Velthari's hologram materialized on the beach, looking more worried than the humans had seen her yet. Champions, this trial will test your ability to survive in deep ocean conditions. The Aquarian civilization was destroyed when pressure variations at depths exceeding 200 meters caused their cities to collapse. You must explore the ruins, retrieve artifacts from the deepest sections, and survive for 4 days using oceanic resources. Jake looked out at the peaceful waves and shrugged. How deep are we talking about exactly? The deepest ruins are at 250 meters below surface. Pressure at that depth is approximately 26 times greater than surface atmospheric pressure. Lisa's eyes lit up. That's not too bad. I've done research dives to similar depths in ocean trenches. The pressure's significant but manageable with proper technique. The alien stared at her. She was talking about pressure that could crush most beings like empty cans, and she seemed excited about it. The alien teams began deploying their deep-sea equipment. Robotic submarines, pressure-resistant vehicles, and long-range sensors spread out across the water. The humans took a much simpler approach. Ben stripped down to swimming shorts and dove directly into the water. He'd learned to swim in the Gulf of Mexico and felt comfortable in ocean environments. Water's perfect. Good visibility, no strong currents, plenty of fish. Amy followed him, using basic freediving techniques she'd learned during Coast Guard training. She took several deep breaths, hyperventilated briefly to load her blood with oxygen, then dove straight down toward the underwater ruins. The alien observers panicked. The humans are entering the pressure zone without protective equipment. Krexthor's technical team shouted. Their bodies will be crushed, Salandra's scientists predicted. Amy descended steadily, equalizing the pressure in her ears by pinching her nose and gently blowing, a technique any recreational scuba diver would know. At 60 feet down, she could see the first Aquarian ruins, beautiful crystalline structures now covered in colorful marine growth. She touched the bottom, picked up a small artifact as proof of her dive, then swam back to the surface. The entire descent and ascent took less than 3 minutes. Found some ruins at about 60 feet, she reported to her teammates, breathing normally. Pretty easy dive. The artifact chambers are deeper, but they don't look too challenging. Jake was impressed. How long can you hold your breath? About 4 minutes on a good day. My cousin got me into free diving when I was in college. We used to dive for abalone off the California coast. Lisa was already planning their deep water strategy. We can take turns going deeper. I've got cave diving experience, so I can handle the more complex navigation. The key is to work in stages, letting our bodies adapt to the pressure changes. Ben had found a school of fish and was studying their behavior. Fishing should be easy here. Lots of species, they don't seem afraid of humans. We could probably catch enough to eat with basic techniques. Over the next several hours, the humans established a systematic approach to the deep water challenge. They took turns diving to progressively deeper levels, spending time at each depth to let their bodies adapt naturally. Amy reached the 150-foot level on her second day, using breath-holding techniques she'd learned for emergency water rescues. Lisa made it to 200 feet by the third day, navigating through the collapsed Aquarian structures with the confidence of someone who'd explored underwater caves as part of her research. Jake surprised everyone by adapting quickly to the water environment, despite being a helicopter mechanic. It's not that different from working in confined spaces, he explained. You stay calm, conserve your energy, and pay attention to your body signals. The alien champions watched in growing amazement as the humans treated lethal pressure depths like a challenging swimming pool. Their physiology is adapting to pressure changes in real time, Krexthor's medical team reported. Their cardiovascular systems are naturally adjusting blood flow and oxygen distribution. They're demonstrating something called the mammalian dive reflex, Salandra's scientists observed. Their heart rate's slow, blood vessels constrict, and oxygen consumption decreases automatically when they hold their breath underwater. Ben had discovered that the local fish responded well to simple fishing techniques he'd learned during childhood trips with his grandfather. Using improvised hooks and lines, he was catching fresh fish daily. These taste just like red snapper. Actually, they taste better than most fish I've caught in the Gulf. Amy had found that certain seaweeds made excellent additions to their meals, applying knowledge she'd gained from foraging workshops she'd attended as a hobby. My brother's into that survival cooking stuff. He taught me which ocean plants are good eating. Lisa was having the time of her life exploring the underwater ruins. This is incredible research opportunity. The marine ecosystem has completely adapted to the artificial reef created by the ruins. I'm seeing species combinations that shouldn't exist according to conventional biology. On the final day, Jake volunteered to attempt the deepest dive to retrieve an artifact from the 250-meter depth. He spent the morning preparing, using relaxation techniques he'd learned for dealing with stress during helicopter rescues. Just like working on aircraft at altitude, he told himself, taking deep preparatory breaths, stay calm, work efficiently, get back safely. He dove steadily downward, equalizing pressure as he went. At 250 meters, the pressure was enormous, enough to crush most creatures instantly. Jake felt the weight of the water pressing on his body from all sides, but he'd experienced similar sensations during high-altitude flights and decompression training. He located the required artifact in the deepest aquarium chamber, grabbed it, and began his ascent. The entire dive took 6 minutes, well within his breath-holding capacity. When he surfaced, the alien observers were in complete shock. Impossible, Quinval's science officer stated flatly. No biological organism should survive that pressure without technological assistance. Their skeletal and muscular systems are naturally resistant to compression, Krexthor's medical team reported, and their respiratory system can function with minimal oxygen for extended periods. Dr. Velthari's hologram appeared for the final debrief, her scales showing colors the humans had never seen before, apparently indicating complete bewilderment. The humans have not only survived deep ocean pressures that destroyed an entire civilization, but they appear to have found the experience enjoyable. Amy was wringing salt water from her hair and grinning. It was fun. Reminded me of diving. Trips with my family in the Caribbean. The underwater ruins were beautiful, like swimming through an underwater museum. Lisa was carefully cataloging samples of marine life she'd collected. I'd love to come back here for extended research. The biodiversity is amazing, and the ecosystem is perfectly balanced. Ben was cleaning the fish he'd caught for their final meal on the island. Great fishing spot. The water's clean, plenty of variety, and the fish aren't overly cautious. Perfect for sport fishing. The final trial took place on Nukara Prime, a world that had once been the jewel of the Stellarian Empire. Now it was a wasteland of twisted metal and crystallized sand, bathed in deadly radiation from a nearby pulsar star. The original inhabitants had been wiped out in a single day when a solar flare had overwhelmed their planetary shields. Since then, the radiation levels had made the planet uninhabitable for most galactic species. Even brief exposure could cause cellular breakdown and death. Jake Morrison stepped off the transport and immediately heard the clicking of his radiation detector. The sound was steady and rapid, indicating significant exposure. He'd worked around radioactive materials during his military service, maintaining helicopters that had been exposed to depleted uranium and other hazardous substances. Well, that's not good, he said, checking the reading, but not immediately fatal either. Amy. Walsh examined her own detector with the calm professionalism of someone who'd worked in hospital radiology departments. Emergency room nurses often assisted with radiation exposure cases and were trained to recognize dangerous levels. We're looking at about 50 Roentgens per hour, definitely hazardous for long-term exposure, but manageable for short periods, with proper precautions. Dr. Lisa Carter was studying the environmental data on her tablet. Marine biologists working with deep-sea creatures often encountered naturally radioactive environments around hydrothermal vents and uranium-rich areas of the ocean floor. The readings are high, but not immediately lethal. We'll need to limit exposure time and find shelter, but it's survivable. Ben Rodriguez looked around at the blasted landscape with interest rather than fear. As a park ranger in the American Southwest, he'd worked in areas downwind from old nuclear test sites and had training in radiation safety. Looks like the Nevada test site after some of the bigger bomb trials. Hostile but not impossible to work in. The alien champions approached the radiation challenge with extreme caution and fear. Krexthor emerged encased in the most advanced radiation shielding available, a suit that looked like a mobile bunker. His volcanic world evolution had given him no natural resistance to ionizing radiation, making even minimal exposure potentially fatal. Zelandra remained sealed inside a heavily shielded habitat module. Her crystalline ice world physiology was extremely vulnerable to radiation damage, which could disrupt her molecular structure at the atomic level. Quinval's electromagnetic form was barely visible inside multiple layers of protective fields. As an energy being, he was particularly susceptible to radiation interference, which could scatter his consciousness across the electromagnetic spectrum. Dr. Velthari's hologram appeared, but the image was distorted and flickering due to the radiation interference. Champions, welcome to the final trial. Nukara Prime receives constant bombardment from cosmic radiation and solar flares. The Stellarians were eliminated in 6 hours when their shields failed. You must survive here for 48 hours while completing tasks that require exposure to the highest radiation zones. Jake consulted his father's old survival manual, which had included a section on radiation exposure from his Korean War service. What kind of exposure levels are we talking about in the high radiation zones? Peak levels reach 500 Röntgens per hour in the central ruins. Brief exposure at those levels would be fatal to most species. Amy whistled softly. That's serious, but not instantly deadly. Hospital workers deal with radiation exposure protocols all the time. The key is minimizing exposure time and using proper shielding techniques. The alien observers were stunned. The humans were discussing lethal radiation levels like occupational safety concerns. The alien teams immediately began deploying robotic systems and remote-controlled equipment. They would attempt to complete their tasks without any direct exposure to the radiation fields. The humans took a more hands-on approach. Jake had brought simple radiation shielding materials, lead blankets, and basic protective clothing that any military mechanic would recognize. My dad always said the secret to working with radiation was respecting it without being paralyzed by fear. Fast in, fast out, and use every bit of protection you can find. Ben scouted the area for natural shelter, applying skills he'd learned working in contaminated areas of national parks. Those concrete structures over there will provide good shielding. And if we work during the cooler parts of the day, we'll sweat less and absorb fewer radioactive particles. Lisa was calculating exposure limits using formulas she'd learned for deep-sea research around naturally radioactive areas. We can safely work in the medium radiation zones for about 2 hours per day if we spread it across multiple short exposures. The high radiation areas will require quick in-and-out missions. Amy organized their work schedule like a medical emergency response, creating rotation schedules and monitoring protocols. We'll work in pairs, with constant communication and vital sign monitoring. If anyone starts showing symptoms of radiation sickness, they pull back immediately. Over the first day, the humans systematically explored the radioactive ruins using techniques they'd learned from various civilian and military backgrounds. Jake completed repairs on damaged equipment using the same methods he'd used fixing helicopters, contaminated during military operations. He worked quickly and efficiently, minimizing his exposure time while accomplishing the necessary tasks. Ben navigated through the highest radiation zones using route planning skills learned from guiding hikers through hazardous wilderness areas. He found the safest paths through the ruins and identified emergency shelter locations. Lisa collected required samples from the most dangerous areas, applying collection techniques she'd learned working around naturally radioactive marine environments. Her scientific training helped her work quickly and precisely. Amy provided medical monitoring for the entire team, using knowledge gained from treating radiation exposure cases in the emergency room. She tracked everyone's exposure levels and watched for early symptoms of radiation sickness. The alien champions watched in amazement as the humans calmly worked in conditions that terrified them. They're functioning normally in a radiation environment that would kill most beings in hours. Krexthor's medical team reported. Their cellular structure appears to have natural resistance to radiation damage, Zalandra's scientists observed, and they seem to have developed cultural protocols for working safely in contaminated environments. On the second day, a massive solar flare struck the planet, dramatically increasing radiation levels across the entire surface. The alien teams retreated to their most heavily shielded positions and waited for the event to pass. The humans adapted their schedule and continued working. Solar flares were always a risk when my dad was stationed in Korea, Jake explained, adjusting his work plan. You just have to be extra careful and work faster. Amy monitored everyone's radiation badges more frequently. We're still within manageable exposure limits. The key is not panicking and making mistakes that would increase our exposure time. The breakthrough moment came when the alien equipment failed due to radiation damage. Krexthor's robotic systems shut down, leaving him unable to complete his required tasks. His team faced elimination from the competition. Without hesitation, Jake grabbed extra shielding and headed toward Krexthor's position. Nobody gets left behind, he said, applying a principle learned during military service. Amy and Ben followed, carrying emergency medical supplies and additional protective equipment. Lisa remained at base camp, monitoring radiation levels and maintaining communication. They found Krexthor trapped when his shelter had partially collapsed due to radiation-weakened structural supports. His advanced suit was protecting him from immediate radiation death, but he couldn't move to safety. Just stay calm, Jake told the alien champion, beginning to clear debris. We'll have you out of here in no time. Amy monitored Krexthor's vital signs while Ben and Jake worked to free him from the collapsed shelter. They worked efficiently despite the lethal radiation levels around them, treating it like any other emergency rescue operation. How are you functioning in this environment? Krexthor asked through his suit's communicator. The radiation here should have killed you already. Ben continued moving debris while answering. Humans have been dealing with radiation for generations. Nuclear power, medical procedures, space travel, weapons testing. We've learned how to work safely around it. Amy was administering basic medical care to Krexthor while explaining her background. I've treated dozens of radiation exposure cases, cancer patients, industrial accidents, medical overexposures. The human body can handle quite a bit if you know what you're doing. Jake finished clearing the last of the debris and helped Krexthor to his feet. My grandfather worked at nuclear reactors after World War II. He always said radiation was just another workplace hazard. Dangerous if you're careless, but manageable if you follow proper procedures. They successfully extracted Krexthor from the high radiation zone and returned him to his team's shielded area. The rescue had taken place in an environment that registered over 400 Roentgens per hour, enough to kill most aliens in minutes. When the trial officially ended, the differences between human and alien approaches had become stark. The alien champions had survived by hiding behind the most advanced